The UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights has arrived in Myanmar's Rakhine State to probe escalating violence there, including torture, rape, and the killing of Rohingya Muslims by the military. Yanghee Lee is on a 12-day trip to Myanmar amid international concerns about the plight of the Rohingyas. During her stay, she is to meet with the victims as well as political and civil society representatives before presenting a report to the UN Human Rights Council. Now, upon arrival in the capital on Friday, the UN envoy visited an enclave where some 4,000 Rohingya Muslims are confined, but residents there felt pessimistic about her mission.
We told the UN Rights Envoy that nothing has changed for us. We want our children to learn in schools peacefully, and we want jobs like we had before.
Myanmar is under severe criticism from the UN and rights organizations for the brutal crackdown on Rohingya that began last October. And the crackdown has forced an estimated 65,000 people to flee across the border to Bangladesh. The minority Muslim community has faced systematic persecution in a predominantly Buddhist nation for decades. Recent satellite images and witness accounts show widespread arson attacks, killing of Muslims, and rape of Rohingya women by Myanmar's security forces. Crossing over to Manchester in the UK, joined by the Director of Centre for Muslim Affairs, Mr. Jahangir Mohammed. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, is this a step in the right direction? Do you think that it's going to make a difference now that we have this UN Special Rapporteur actually visiting the area?
Well, this has been going on for decades, as you mentioned, but more recently since 2012. So this is not a new conflict or a new violence that we're witnessing, and the UN has commented on it many times. There have been many reports, international agencies have reported. I really don't understand what the purpose of this visit is. It seems to be one that's facilitated by the Myanmar state, so there are real questions as to just how accurate and impartial it can be. But nevertheless, it's really saying what everybody else knows or is going to report. We don't need report after report telling us what's happening to the Rohingya Muslims. We already know what's happening to them. Social media reports it every day. We see pictures. We have refugees. We have aid agencies. We see the torture, the rapes. We're well aware that a genocidal campaign.
So if you're saying you're well aware and the world is well aware, then why do you think that the United Nations then would send a representative instead of actually trying to take concrete measures to protect the lives of this minority group that, as you say, with these attempts at genocide being committed against them?
Well, the United Nations works in a particular way. It almost has two ways of working, one for Muslim issues and one for non-Muslim issues. You see that wherever there is a Muslim conflict, it engages in endless diplomacy, in endless reporting, very little action, resolutions, attempts at resolutions, very little action. But when it's the interests of another minority community or in the interests of Western nations, the action is almost swift and immediate. And we just need to look at Sudan, for example, where the Sudanese state has actually been carved up by the United Nations because the south, where there is a Christian minority, the West made a great issue about that. Even though it's not majority Christian, there are non-believers there, and yet it indicted the president of Sudan as a war criminal, and it effectively tore the country into two. And we see this elsewhere taking place, whether it's been in Lebanon in the past. Whenever there's a non-Muslim issue, they act quickly. Whenever there's a Muslim issue, it seems almost as if these are just time-wasting efforts or gains, allowing the perpetrators of the violence and often the conflicts to carry out their objective. We saw this in Bosnia, for example, where they allowed the Serbs endless time to achieve the elimination of Muslims until, in the end, the United States decided for their own interest to act. And we've seen this. It would be an interesting piece of research for somebody to look at how the United Nations has, for the last 60 years, behaved in relation to Muslim countries and Muslim conflicts, and compare it to how it's dealt with others. And what we see is just another report here.
Okay. All right. So sorry, we'll have to interrupt you. I'm out of time, but I appreciate you being with us out of Manchester. Mr. Jahangir Mohammed, Director, Centre for Muslim Affairs in Manchester.